Hi, I'm Teresa, the Recruitment Team Leader at the Department for Child Protection in South Australia.
And I'm Rod, also from the recruitment team at DCP. We're here today to talk you through how you respond to selection criteria when applying for a job in the public sector. If you are applying for a job with us, it's likely that you're going to be asked to address the job selection criteria in your application.
This is something a lot of people get wrong. So keep watching if you'd like to know how to better your chances of getting an interview. We've got a lot to get through, but I promise this is all important information that can help you a lot.
What are selection criteria and where do I find them?
Okay, so when you apply for a job, all the applications are reviewed by a specific group of people known as the selection panel. The group is made up of people who are familiar with the role or environment that you will be working in. Your application needs to convince the selection panel that you have the qualities, skills, experience and knowledge to do the job. The capabilities you need are listed very clearly in the role description that you access through the job advert. Here in DCP, we call them selection criteria, although you may also see them listed as core competencies or key outcomes. Some other government departments might refer to them as minimum essential requirements or something similar. But whatever they're called, it should be pretty obvious. For the sake of simplicity, let's just call them selection criteria. The selection panel will check your application against the selection criteria so that all applications are judged fairly and equally.
So you're saying I need to meet all of the selection criteria to get the job?
Yes, but there are a few caveats. Firstly, if you don't have any work history to match the criterion, remember that most of us have transferable skills from volunteering or life experience. They can count just as much. Secondly, the selection criteria are what help the panel to shortlist, but they're not looked at in isolation. Read the whole job description so you can respond to the selection criteria based on the needs and outcomes of that specific job.
So hold that thought, we'll come back to that a bit later.
Sure. The third thing to know is that not all selection criteria are equal. They're sometimes divided into important and less important criteria. The important criteria are weighted equally against each other unless it's stated otherwise. The less important criteria are rated equally against the others at that level, and they have a lower weighting than the important criteria. That said, the chances of your application progressing will be greater if you meet all the selection criteria, not just the important ones. Remember, you are probably competing against a lot of other applicants, so you need to show the selection panel why you're the best fit for the job.
Good point. I know when I've applied for a job in the past, I sometimes get so focused on my own application that I forget that it's kind of like a competition, isn't it? I don't have to just show that I can do the job, but I need to show that I can do it better than anybody else who's applying. So my key takeaway from that is that in my application, I should treat all selection criteria equally, even if the job description has rated some of them as less important.
Correct. But like everything in life, there's always exceptions to the rule. Sometimes you'll see the selection criteria listed as either essential or desirable instead. In that instance, essential criteria means that you must have that skill, qualification or experience. If you don't have it, you're less likely to be shortlisted. Desirable criteria is a nice to have. It can put you ahead of the competition, but if you don't have it, your application won't automatically be excluded from progressing.
Okay, so to summarise, the selection panel will rate my application against the criteria to see if I have the skills, the knowledge and the experience needed to do the job. I have to have all of the essential criteria to be seriously considered for the job, but I don't have to have all of the desirable criteria, although that will increase my chances to progress through the process if I meet them too.
Yes, correct.
Okay, right, so next question. How do I address the selection criteria? Do I just list each criterion in my application and comment on each one? Like, yes, I have that skill, or yes, I learnt about that in uni, so I have the knowledge that you need?
No, absolutely not. Remember, you are selling yourself to us. You have to prove that you're the best person for the job. Anyone can just make a statement like that. What we need is evidence that shows the selection panel how you meet the selection criteria and to what level.
So you mean like, I don't know, here's a potted plant that I grew from a seed, so here, hire me as your gardener.
Well, not quite, although you're on the right track. The key is to provide specific details that demonstrate both how and how much you meet the selection criteria. You do this by giving an example of when you used that capability and how you used it. And wherever possible, also tell us the outcome of your example or how you know your actions were successful.
But how would I do that without having to write a whole essay on every selection criteria?
Well, there's an easy way to do this, and it's by using the STAR model. STAR. The letters stand for situation, task, approach or action, and result.
So break it down for me.
Sure. STAR. The S stands for situation. This is where you provide a brief outline of a situation or setting where you use the capability. T is for task, where you outline what you did in that situation. A is for approach or action, where you outline how you did it. And finally, R stands for result, where you describe the outcome. Let me give you a very basic example. The situation was that my boss needed a coffee but was too busy to run across to the cafe. The task I set myself was to do her a favour and go to the cafe for her. My approach or action was to catch my boss in a free moment, get the money and her coffee order, advise my teammates that I would be back in 5 minutes, and then get the coffee and deliver it to my boss. The outcome was that my boss got her coffee and her mood lifted, so we all lived happily ever after.
I love that example. Thankfully, you had your cuppa before we started filming, so I don't have to run to the cafe for you. But anyway, putting aside our cravings for caffeine, how would you actually answer the selection criteria if you were applying for a job with the Department for Child Protection?
Well, I like to break it into 5 steps. Firstly, I need to make sure I understand the selection criteria. Then I consider my opening sentence. I brainstorm ideas for each criterion. I provide the evidence through an example. And finally, a step many people make the mistake of not doing, I check my answer.
Okay, so step 1, understanding the selection criteria. Let's take a common capability that you see in a lot of job descriptions, written communication skills. Talk me through it.
Sure. The associated selection criteria could be well-developed written communication skills, including the ability to structure written communications, such as reports to meet the needs and understanding of the extended audience, express opinions, informations and key points of an argument clearly and concisely, and to write convincingly in an engaging and expressive manner. It's important that you understand what is meant by each criterion before putting pen to paper. Check the key outcomes of the job and any other information provided about the job to see how each selection criteria relates to the expectations of the position. This is important because if you tell us that your exceptional writing skills are all about how good you are at writing poetry, that's not going to help the selection panel know how good you are at writing reports.
Good point. So understanding each selection criteria means also understanding how it relates to the outcomes of the job so we can give a relevant example to prove that we're capable. All right, so on to step 2, the opening sentence. Now I assume we're not going to be starting with once upon a time.
Definitely not. Keep the fiction and poetry for a job that needs it. When addressing each selection criteria, you should begin with an opening sentence that clearly states your claim to this criterion. For example, I possess strong written communication skills which I have developed over the course of my career. This opening statement then needs to be supported by at least one detailed example of when you demonstrated these skills in a relevant situation, such as a former job or in a volunteer commitment.
See, this is the bit that I always find the hardest, coming up with examples. I mean, I know I've got what's needed to do the job, but thinking back over my years of work, it's hard to pinpoint good examples. And back when I was starting my career, I didn't even have work examples.
Easy. Brainstorm. For each selection criterion, brainstorm ideas from your recent work life. If you've been in the workforce for a while, examples from 20 years ago aren't likely to be relevant anymore. So keep your examples to recent times, ideally within the past 3 years. If you're just coming out of uni or have limited work experience, think of examples from your studies, project work, volunteer work, or community activities. For example, acting as the secretary in your local sports club might be an appropriate example to meet 1 or 2 of a job selection criteria. Write your examples down and keep them somewhere safe so next time you apply for a job, you've already got an arsenal of examples that you can adapt and use in the future.
So can you give me some more examples of what kinds of experiences I could use to demonstrate that I meet the selection criteria? Let's stick to the criteria written communication skills.
Okay, let's say I'm applying for a senior project officer role, which includes well-developed written communication skills as one of the selection criteria. Some of the situations I could use to illustrate my written communication skills might include, as a project officer at Department XYZ, I needed to write a report on project planning methodologies. Or, when I was a research support officer at the Department for ABC, I designed and compiled a monthly newsletter. Or, when I worked on a research project at GBL Company, I needed to collate diverse sets of data, organise information into topic areas, and synthesise it all into a paper for senior management written in plain English so they could understand it. It is useful to think up as many examples as possible, then you can choose which one best fits.
All right, so you've just given me 3 examples of how I could meet the selection criteria about well-developed communication skills. But they're very general though, they're lacking any specific details, so would they be enough?
No, anyone can make a statement. That's why you need to expand on these initial brainstorming ideas to provide the evidence now. It's my 4th step. Choose the example you're going to use by matching your brainstormed ideas against the wording of the criterion and the outcomes of the job that match that criterion. Once you've chosen which of your examples is the best fit, demonstrate how you met the different aspects of the criterion in that example. Remember to use the STAR method, S-T-A-R.
All right, so show me how it's done.
Okay, remember STAR, S-T-A-R stands for situation, task, approach or action, and result. The situation occurred when I was in my role as a research support officer at the Department for ABC. The task was that I needed to ensure that managers were kept informed of policies and procedures. The approach I took was that I initiated a monthly newsletter that was emailed to each manager. I took responsibility for writing the main articles, which involved obtaining ideas and input from other stakeholders to ensure that the articles reflected the manager's needs in terms of content and language. The result of my action was that feedback was consistently excellent. I received a Divisional Achievement Award for the newsletter quality and led to improved lines of communication between managers and the research support unit. Once you've broken that down using the STAR method, you can then write the draft paragraph in full. For example, as the Research and Support Officer at the Department for ABC, I needed to ensure managers were kept informed of policies and procedures. To do this, I initiated a monthly newsletter, which was emailed to each manager. I took responsibility for writing the main articles in each publication. This involved obtaining ideas and input from other stakeholders to ensure that the articles reflected the needs of managers, both in terms of content and language. I received consistently excellent feedback in relation to this newsletter from these internal clients and my own manager. I also received a Divisional Achievement Award for the quality of this newsletter from management. Importantly, the initiative resulted in improved lines of communication between managers and the research support unit.
Oh, thanks for that. So your example gives me the detail I need. It also tells me how successful it was. So now your final step is to check your work. A lot of people are not great at checking their own writing. What tips could you offer them?
Well, I have a series of questions I ask myself, and for each question, I look over my application again. Remember, if you want the job, you have to put in the effort. So a few extra reads of your application can make the world of difference.
Ooh, yes, it can. So what do you ask yourself?
Well, first question, have I used positive and specific language? It's important to avoid ambiguous or unclear expressions like saying, I was involved in or I assisted with. These expressions make it difficult for the selection panel to understand exactly how much work you did towards it. So instead of saying, I assisted with the process through a monthly newsletter, be more specific and give an exact example of what your involvement was. Something like, I initiated a monthly newsletter, or I wrote a majority of the articles for our 10-page staff newsletter. Words and phrases which could reduce credibility should also be avoided. For example, words like some, a little, limited, somewhat, etc. Following on from that, the next question I ask myself is, have I used strong action words? Avoid using passive language when describing your experience. For example, saying, "I received consistently excellent feedback in relation to this newsletter from internal clients and my own manager," is better than simply stating, "Feedback in relation to this newsletter was consistently excellent." Can you see and hear the difference?
Yeah, I can. The second example using the passive language was a generic statement and it had no details. And it's interesting because using the active language in your first example also made you sound a lot more confident.
Yes, it does. And you want to come across as confident in your application. If you don't show confidence in yourself, how can the selection panel have confidence in you? And speaking of giving the selection panel confidence, the next question I ask myself is, have I avoided unsupported claims about my capabilities? We gain confidence in you when you can demonstrate your capabilities instead of just talking about them. For example, rather than just saying the newsletter was received well by others, this assertion needs to be substantiated. In our example, you can do this by adding, "I received a Divisional Achievement Award from management for the quality of this newsletter."
Ah, yes, and we've said it before and it's worth saying again, always give an example. Don't just make a blanket statement that anybody could say.
And make sure you've covered everything you need to. Always ask yourself, have I addressed all aspects of each criterion? Go back to the wording in the job description of each selection criterion and check what you've written against what the job description says. In our sample job, we talked earlier about well-developed written communication skills, and that included a few components, not just one. Our example said you have to be able to structure written communications, such as reports to meet the needs and understanding of the intended audience, express opinions, information and key points of an argument clearly and concisely, and to write convincingly in an engaging and expressive manner. Reading back on my earlier response, I referred to that first point, structure written communications to meet the needs and understanding of the intended audience, but not the other two.
So just to jump in for a moment, that was the response where you were the research and support officer at the department for ABC, the one where you created a monthly newsletter for which you got an excellent feedback and a Divisional Achievement Award, right?
Yes, we're still using that one. It's a great example of giving an example. But when I review my application at this point, I can see now that I didn't fully address that particular selection criterion. Of the 3 points covered under that criterion, I only responded to the first one. So I now need to go back and expand on my answers to address those other 2 issues as well. And while I'm at it, I should also consider the language used in each of the selection criteria. Is it asking about my skills or my knowledge? If the criterion was focusing on my actual experiences that put my skills to use, I need to give examples, as we've just done. If the criterion was phrased as having knowledge of effective written communication skills and techniques, this would require different examples, which don't necessarily rely on a description of my actual performance in the workplace. You might instead refer to the high distinction you got for the subject in university, or show your awareness by referring to how you keep your knowledge up to date on that topic.
It's a lot of information to consider and some good advice. Thank you for that, Teresa. I hope it's going to be a lot of help to anybody applying for a job with the department. I just have one final question to wrap it up, and that's about layout and design. Can you talk to me about the structure of my cover letter or the document where I'm addressing the selection criteria?
Your layout is almost as important as your answers. It is likely the selection panel will receive a lot of applications. So as an applicant, I would want to make my document as easy for them to read as possible. You need to think about the layout, the length, and the overall presentation. Lay out your answers in dot points whenever that's appropriate. Complement that by keeping your paragraphs short. You should avoid long paragraphs wherever possible. The white space on your page from using dot points and short paragraphs makes it easier for people to read and later to skim when they're reviewing what you wrote a second time. By using dot points, you are also demonstrating your written communication skills in the document itself. If your writing is concise, you should be able to respond to the criterion in about 250 words each. This will depend on various factors like the role you're applying for or how complex your example is. But as a general rule of thumb, aiming for approximately 250 words is a good length for each of your answers. And finally, you should ensure that there are no errors anywhere in the document is formatted neatly, and that the sentences are grammatically correct and concise. It doesn't hurt to have someone else read over your application too. A fresh set of eyes might pick up spelling or grammatical errors that you've missed yourself.
Awesome. So there you have it. If you haven't taken notes during this video, I recommend that you watch it again and jot down some of the key points so that you remember them in the future. And they are:
understand each selection criterion and what it includes. Brainstorm examples of how you meet the needs of each criterion so you can pick the best example. State your claim about how you meet each of the criteria and always give an example as evidence. Use active language and be specific. Don't be vague or misleading. Be sure your document is laid out in an easy to read format with lots of white space. And finally, always, always, always look back over what you've written to find any typing errors or missing information.
That's a good summary. Thank you, Teresa, and thank you for joining us. If you're not already following our Facebook page, you might be missing out on a lot more tips and tricks to help you get a job with the Department for Child Protection, not to mention links to many of our available jobs too. Our Facebook page is called Careers in DCP, and you can give us a thumbs up at facebook.com/careersindcp, written as one word, no spaces. If you have any questions about the content of this video, or even generally about applying for a job with the Department for Child Protection, hit us up on Facebook or send us a message to DCP Recruitment, that's also written as one word, dcprecruitment@sa.gov.au. Thanks again for joining us, and good luck with your job application. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.